Alright, hey guys, what's up and welcome back. So, today I want to just share with you guys my favorite superhero comics. So, this is not a top five or whatever list. This is just the five comics that I like the most. You can take them in no particular order, but I'm just gonna go from five to one. But I would say all of them are good in general. But of course, some of them they are kind of special to me, especially the Spider-Man comics, because those are like I would say some of the best comics or reading material that I've ever had, like ever. And then most of them, of course, I have read since the very early days of my childhood. We used to like collect coins to try to purchase the latest comic from the bookstore like across the street from my school. I remember back then it was really cheap. You could get a comic for like between 50 cents to a dollar, and in my currency it could be a little bit different from you guys, but yeah, it was kind of the price that I used to get these comics for, and it was pretty cool. And sometimes we couldn't get the actual ones, like the original ones, because they were too expensive, or rather the colored versions. So we used to sometimes go to the secondhand bookstore and get like these kind of black and white copies of cheaper versions of the comics as well. So I kind of remember that. But anyway, let me just go ahead and start off with number five, which is Superman Birthright. So this is a relatively newer comic, but I feel that it did encompass a good deal of the way I kind of enjoyed Superman. And Superman's comics, of course, are very difficult to create because Superman is just so powerful that more than often you're trying to nerf him in some way just to get the story going. Or some comic book authors show a lot of kind of Clark Kent's personality and how he deals with all of these abilities and his moral kind of values of trying to be a good person, and at the same time, you know, trying not to overstep his boundaries between what he should be doing as Superman and taking too much control over the world, because he is capable of total world domination, as we have seen in like comics like the Injustice. So Superman Birthright was definitely something that kind of got me to like Superman very much. I would say I did like him when I was a kid because of the Superman movies, but I never really read the comics until I came across this one. And I have to say that after reading this, I actually went back to like older comics, like the Action comics, and I went to look for a little bit more of Superman. But I felt that this is still very classic for me, and it was pretty much the stepping stone for me to start reading these Superman comics. So yeah, there you have it, Superman Birthright. Coming in at number four is Batman the Killing Joke. Now, I don't. This is the only picture I have of this, which is pretty much, I believe it's the cover. I didn't include the other photos because this comic is very much an adult superhero comic, because it's very dark, it's very gritty. It shows a lot of R-rated footage. I mean, scenes. I would say not really footage, R-rated scenes, but the concept of what the Joker does and the Killing Joke is pretty dark. And I would say that this is pretty much the worst we will ever see Commissioner Gordon in a state of anything. And the kind of lengths that Batman goes to try to stop Joker in this is also pretty scary per se, to kind of be also in the brink of snapping just because of another psychopath, that is just so terrifying that he could bring you to the brink of losing your sanity. So I really enjoyed this version of the Joker where he just lets all loose. He's not robbing banks, he's not just trying to take on Batman in another day. He just undoes people altogether in this, and it was pretty scary. So I really enjoyed this comic, and it's very unique because this is a single. It is a single edition comic. There was only one. I believe there's only one of it. It's just a single comic. Batman: The Killing Joke. You guys could easily just buy this online to read it, or you could just find a simple. You find it almost in any comic book store, really. But yeah, it's pretty much an adult comic. So if you guys are not really considered adult in your place, please try not to read this, because it's pretty psychologically scary. Yeah, number three, Avengers versus X-Men. Now, this was definitely one of my favorites, like holistically, because it pitted some of my favorite characters against each other. And I mean, who can forget the scene of Spider-Man standing off against the Phoenix Force X-Men? That was freaking awesome. But truly, this was a comic that showed us so many different characters. It pulled in all these different storylines, these different character arcs, and tried to put them on screen and pitted them against each other. It's really nice to be a person who took sides, but I mean, just the sheer visuals and the quality of the content and dialogues, everything you get from this comic was just so nice to read and to be a part of. And this is pretty much the best versus comic you're going to find out there. Like among all of the others, you have the DC versus Marvel, you have the Avengers versus sorry, is it I think it's the X-Men versus the Inhumans, and then you have of course the Civil War 2 with Captain Marvel and all of that. But this one's pretty awesome. And I mean, I was a big X-Men fan as a kid because of the animated series, and then I slowly started to read the comics as a result of that. And this Avengers vs. X-Men was definitely my favorite. So yeah, that's number three. Number two, Injustice. Injustice, I'm just gonna go ahead and put all of it in one basket. Injustice 1, Injustice 2. I would kind of say Injustice 1 was a little bit better for me than Injustice 2, but I'm just gonna put them together because they're still one entire story. And I loved both of like the entire thing. Injustice was definitely my favorite kind of DC comic and kind of go to when it comes to putting up Superman versus Batman, and then the rest of the Justice League just being a part of this entire mess, I would say, because Superman and Batman are just such powerful, dominating figures in the DC universe, and they're pretty much on two sides of the table. And you know, in any Batman versus Superman version, I felt that the Injustice really did justice. See what I did there? So in this one, it was really nice to see Batman and Superman have a lot of planned scenarios where they have to like figure out a way to take on each other or kind of carry out their form or their methods, because Superman in this enforces a lot of unique laws against humanity, and we kind of see him as a tyrant trying to take over the world, and then Batman has to try to stand up against him. But let me just warn you that Wonder Woman is so psycho in this, you will just be terrified of Wonder Woman altogether after reading Injustice. But man, the way the Joker starts off this comic, the way Superman turns evil, is just something that, like, that's some pretty dark stuff right there. And honestly, I did not expect like Injustice to actually grow out so much, because we got video games and we got more comics upcoming. We got so much of concept art. I believe even Zack Snyder's version of BVS was actually leading towards the Injustice universe, which would have been so awesome if we got to see it. But anyway, that's the second place. Let's go to the first one. Yes, I mean, some of you would have guessed it from me starting off the video. The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, where would comics be if not for this? I mean, Amazing Spider-Man started really long ago, and I mean really, really long. Let me just like Google up the numbers for you. Amazing Spider-Man comics, I guess. It says 1963. So yeah, that's pretty much as old as it gets. That's way older than me. But anyway, 1963, yeah. But what I really liked is I started off, honestly, I started off like somewhere before the 500th issue, like just shortly before the 500th, and I liked every bit of it. Like before the 500th, the animations and all of that, the quality of the drawings and everything was a little bit different. But after the 500th edition, they got this very colorful, very detailed, much more realistic form of art, I would say, and a lot more appealing to the eyes of a comic fan. And these were definitely the best comics. Man, the part where you have Morlun like plucking out Spider-Man's eye, and you know, the entire fight the sequences that he has to go through, the part where they lose their child, Mary Jane and him lose their child. It's really dark, spoiler alert. But I mean, if you guys have read The Amazing Spider-Man, you guys will know just how impressive this comic is compared to everything else that exists, because it takes you through so many twists and turns. It pulls you back, it pushes you, it makes you rethink your entire concept of the kind of colorful hero that Spider-Man is in terms of his uniform, but his entire life is just so dark and gritty. And he's one of the most relatable comic book characters for me. I always felt that he's very down to earth, he's more realistic, he's kind of the geek. He's kind of like you if you have a very basic life, except that he got superpowers and he's freaking awesome because of that. And more than often, the Amazing Spider-Man will really teach us to question these values and question these concepts, which is why I feel that this is definitely my favorite comic of all time, and it gave me some of the best stories I've ever read in any of the comics. And I mean, kudos to Injustice, of course, to kind of come up with something unique and something dark and gritty. But Spider-Man had basically been there. He has been beaten up. He has gotten up from the worst. He has taken on terrifying threats far more superior to him, and somehow or other he manages to pull through. And I mean, I enjoyed most of the dialogues that Peter Parker was given in these comics, as opposed to the other comics that I've read of Spider-Man, and also compared to the films. Of course, the films never get the good dialogues. Most of them are in the comics, but people apparently only remember the films because they don't really read comics as much. But yeah, that's about it. So, I mean, I guess you guys pretty much know how much of a Spider-Man fan I am, but honestly, this was definitely what made me that fan. So if you guys have not checked it out, go ahead, read The Amazing Spider-Man. You could start at the 500th, you could start before that. It's totally up to you. But just my recommendation, I would tell you go ahead and start at the 500th, because the visual art is more appealing, and you would probably enjoy the Civil War series that was given in the comics a lot better than in the film. The film was Civil War's movie was very bad compared to the comics. The comics Civil War representation was fantastic. Read Injustice. Injustice is great. A very good version of DC if you like things to be very dark and brutal and stuff like that. If you guys want a holistic bunch of action, a lot of characters, go for Avengers vs. X-Men. You'll get amazing fight scenes. If you want something totally brutal, totally insane, go for Batman the Killing Joke. Make sure you're old enough. And if you guys just want an everyday read, a kind of like throwback to the Man of Steel and what he really is, Superman Birthright would be my recommendation. So that's about it from me. Hopefully you look forward to this little scene here, which is part of the Amazing Spider-Man as well. Him basically redonning the black suit, just one of my favorite scenes. So yeah, go ahead, check this out. Let me know what you guys think, and hopefully I'll catch you guys again next time. Adios.